Hello and welcome. Thank you to Eric Laz and DHUNS or DHUNS1515 for following the channel in the last week or so. And thanks to Not a Hag for the on-screen celebration using bits. I appreciate your support. And today we are going to talk about designing boss encounters. This is a thing that came up a couple of times in conversation at PAX Unplugged with folks, and so I'm excited to continue talking about it and work through where my current thoughts are about this topic. And first, I'm gonna note the CGL language here. Everything that I do in this stream is just my own personal opinion. I'm not speaking for Darrington Press or Critical Role in this. I'm not even speaking for Ghostfire Gaming because I'm working for them on the Drakenheim thing, but this is just me and my own thoughts about Daggerheart and building things for use with the Daggerheart rules. So with all that said, let's get into it. I think I'll probably do a separate video with thoughts on PAX Unplugged so that we can just focus on design for today. But now I'm going to take a drink. Okay, so we need this, we don't need that. We're going to move over to my notes here. Kaboom. Here we are. And first, I have some baseline thoughts about boss encounters for Daggerheart. Number one, what I mean is an encounter that's almost certainly a fight that is meant to be a big capstone experience, probably the culmination of a story arc. This is not necessarily the BBEG of the whole campaign, but this is an adversary who is interesting and dynamic enough that facing them is going to be a big moment where ideally, right, there's going to be some kind of threat or challenge beyond just how much damage can you output. I am looking for synergy with an environment, I think is a key element in making a boss fight that is going to be memorable and fun and exciting. There's a couple of other things that are more specific, mostly about the adversary themselves. One thing I have seen people talk about is whether there should be like a separate boss type adversary, where if you have a boss type adversary, maybe they count more in the encounter budget for the battle points or something else, where you can differentiate this type of adversary from solos and from leaders. Whether to do that is not something I am going to kind of give an answer on for this stream. Instead, I'm thinking about a boss adversary as like an umbrella term, and a solo could be a boss adversary or a leader could be a boss adversary. You could probably make other ones into a boss adversary, though they might then drift from the type in some notable ways, whatever their existing type was. The stuff that I'm going to talk about here is not necessarily designed strictly with the battle point system in mind. The way I'm going to build these, I will say what my expected presentation is, right? If this is a boss and then I am designing a environment that goes with them, and then there's a particular type of other adversary that they summon as part of the fight. If I were prepping this for my own game, I would be prepping it like I'm going to be building it here. So unless I say otherwise, stuff that I'm building here is not intended to then be taken out of context and used using the battle point system. It's just some caveats there, right? This is about building a whole encounter that I think is going to deliver the experience that I'm looking for. So some things that an encounter like that are going to need to be able to do is be a threat or a challenge to the entire party. I want some scalability, whether the party is larger or smaller. I am looking for ways to make sure that the GM can pretty frequently and consistently take moves so that even if the players are very frequently rolling with hope, that the GM is still able to push back in order to make that scene feel exciting. And so there's a few things that go into this. I think key is going to be ways of making moves without spending fear. This is probably mostly going to be reaction features. And I'm going to want a fear generation engine in one or more features across this, all the stuff that I'm building for the encounter, right? There might be a fear generation engine in the environment rather than something like momentum or terrifying as a feature for the boss adversary. Other things that I'm going to want are actions that are scalable, or actions or reactions that are scalable for a larger party, right? That if I built this with the expectation of 4 player characters and then ran it for 6, I wouldn't necessarily have to do a lot of other adjustment. So what that might involve is features that scale with party size, so that scaling is automatically built in. Some elements of Daggerheart are already scalable, right? A reaction feature that gives a boss adversary a counterattack every time they're hit. Oh, I shouldn't do that snapping. That's gonna peak the audio. Sorry. If I snap, it's gonna be over here. Every time that adversary is hit, they get to make a counterattack. Well, that scales with party size, because even if 5 player characters each make an attack and they succeed with hope, that boss is going to get to make a counterattack each of those times using the feature that they have. This probably means a boss with sizable stress pool, and features that don't require stress or fear. Some features. I don't want to necessarily build a boss adversary who never has to spend stress or never makes the GM spend fear, because that is probably that may end up being too much, honestly. But if I'm thinking about all of what this adversary can do, I probably want one or more pretty solid standby thing that this adversary can do that is still going to project threat or create challenge in the scene, even if that boss is vulnerable because they've marked all their stress, or even if the GM is running low on fear. Part of that fear stuff is going to be addressed by having a fear generation engine in this environment or in the adversary stat block themselves. It's also possible that like summoned adversaries might generate fear, right? A certain type of adversary who summons little adversaries, and then those adversaries do something that gives the GM fear. We might be able to create some kind of feedback loop of something where you spend fear, it does something, and that might generate fear. We want to be careful about how we do that so that we don't give the GM too strong of a perpetual fear engine. But having some of a fear generation and utilization engine can be useful for scenes and adversaries that are meant to be especially challenging. I've mentioned this before, but the fight in the second episode of the Age of Umbra series on Critical Role, there's a big fight in episode 2 that I think is a great example of some design in the direction of a boss encounter. I'm going to go ahead and spoil a little bit more. If you haven't seen that and you don't want to be spoiled, then come back in a couple minutes. Velk, the Forsaken, has a fear generation engine in in having momentum, and then has Relentless 2. Velk has an attack that requires stress, Vilk has an AoE attack, which is another thing that's really useful for a boss encounter to be able to project threat to the whole group. What that encounter didn't have, or at least I don't feel like it had in a big meaningful fashion, was a pronounced environment stat block to further the efforts of the scene. Now, Matt Mercer, as the GM, did have things in the environment respond to the player characters and did include the physical space of the scene. But I think in our examples, we can try to go a little bit farther in talking about how you design an environment and at least one key adversary to be interleaving and interdependent, right? Where they support or kind of buff one another up, right? A environment that creates a circumstance that will then benefit the adversary. The adversary then does a thing that reinforces something about how the environment already is. So I went and grabbed some stat blocks from the SRD, hence the, let's see, we want, no, not this thing. We want that thing up there. Yes, thank you. Stuff from the SRD. The Demon of Hubris, a tier 3 leader adversary. And then I have the Burning Heart of the Woods, which is a tier 3 exploration environment. There's some stuff here that I want to point out that could make the Demon of Hubris a good candidate for a boss encounter, and some places where the Burning Heart of the Woods could be a good environment that you could build a boss encounter around. The Demon of Hubris has a really good attack bonus. Junkrabbit says, I'm curious how you do something like Strahd where they could show up in different places. How would you make different environment for each of these locations with an extra feature of Strahd is there or a different version of it entirely? I think if I were... So one thing, the GM can just improvise a move that says that a boss shows up when it makes sense in the fiction. And if it seems a little weird or a little too easy, maybe you spend fear to have the villain show up in that situation. If you are planning to have a big villain show up in a particular environment, I would think about how does that environment already benefit the big boss, right? Because in something like Curse of Strahd, and I've never played Curse of Strahd, but I know of it kind of through the ether, right? If this domain of dread is of Strahd, like almost as if he is the land, or she, if you're doing a she-her Strahd, what in how all of this domain of dread operates, the basic rules of its existence, how does that benefit Strahd? And then you write environment features that establish that. If there are then specific places where Strahd would show up because of the advantages that it would give Strahd, then I would think about how to express those environment features. Something that you might do, and this is an idea that I've had that maybe will end up in Drakenheim, but maybe not, is layering environment stat blocks. Could you have an environment stat block representing an entire region, and then you have a stat block that represents a specific place within that region? If we're looking at something like that's already been published, could you make a stat block for an environment that is the Sablewood in general, right? That location that Darrington published that is the site of the Sablewood Messengers Quick Start Adventure, and one of those environments that was included in the beta manuscript. A baseline Sablewood environment gives the GM some common verbs or like a lingua franca of environment design as a baseline for an entire region. And then specific places could have their own stat blocks. And so what I might do if someone were saying, Mike, here's a contract to adapt Curse of Strahd into Daggerheart. One of the things I might think about is do I build a stat block that is the basic rules of this domain of dread? And then one of the features there is Strahd can appear at any time, or something about how and when Strahd could appear. So those are my thoughts on that kind of an approach. Yeah, the question of cognitive load that Junkrabbit raises, like just not sure what's the upper limit for GM overload. This is definitely something that I have been thinking about and grappling with, because the more different features you give, the larger the menu for the GM to draw from. But anyone who has been to a Cheesecake Factory or another restaurant that has like a gigantic menu, there's a certain point at which more options is demobilizing, right? It's choice paralysis. And it's sometimes not great, or it can be not great, to give a GM so many options that they can't hold all of them in their head, or that there's so many things going on that their eyes just kind of wash over the page, right? Like ducks, like water off a duck's back. So what I will propose for a boss encounter is that you're looking at an environment that is really focused on and trying to be a distillation of elements of design that support what you're trying to do with the overall encounter, and don't need to do anything else. Something that I feel when I look at the environments in the core book is that a lot of them are designed to be very flexible and generic in a positive fashion, right? The Mountain Pass environment can be used for any number of situations where you are in a position where there could be an avalanche, where you might be attacked by raptors, where there are icy winds, right? You could adjust Mountain Pass to be just an icy landscape in general, and all you would need to do is adjust avalanche probably a little bit, right? The Engraved Sigils passive is about a particular thing that the characters can learn about and discover. So you can use that in a bunch of different ways. The environment I'm going to design for a boss encounter doesn't need to do anything else if I'm designing it with that custom purpose in mind. So I'm designing only toward supporting the particular type of scene that I'm trying to set up. And what that means that instead of giving myself a wide menu, I'm trying to think about the key elements that will be easy to remember or incorporate in that scene, where the adversary stat block may still be the primary one that I'm thinking about and returning to, and then the environment is enhancing or bouncing off of that adversary stat block, right? A environment stat block for a boss fight probably does not need to have much in the way of an exploration mechanic, unless that's part of what I'm doing with the scene, right? I might make an environment for a boss encounter an event environment instead of traversal, social, or exploration, as a way of reminding myself to focus on that encounter. I built a environment for the adventure that I was working on for the Witherwild, which is currently on like a side burner because I have too many things going on. There's an event environment that is audience with the swarm. Basically, you are interacting with this faint divinity, and that is an event environment because it's about that interaction. I could have easily called it a social environment, but I wanted to focus on the fact that it is a specific scene and try to use that to keep things constrained. Thank you so much to Hey That's Dusty for following the channel. Thanks for joining us. So jumping back to our Demon of Hubris to talk about some elements that may be useful to think about in terms of a boss encounter, right? So terrifying is a fear engine. When the demon makes a successful attack, all PCs within far range must lose a hope and you gain a fear. Unparalleled skill. Mark a stress to deal the demon's standard attack damage to a target within close range. That is a feature that lets the GM guarantee they are going to deal damage. Now, notably, that is not a hit. Deal the demon's standard attack damage. So you cannot use Unparalleled Skill to activate Terrifying, right? There's a particular type of interaction that the design does not generate because of how Unparalleled Skill is written. As a leader type adversary, right, the root of villainy, spend a fear to spotlight 2 other demons within far range. A leader type adversary can generally summon and or activate other adversaries. So, and then the last thing it has, right, when a PCO fails a roll within close range of the demon, they must mark a stress. That is a way that this adversary can put pressure on a player character through reaction, because if characters have to keep marking stress, they will become vulnerable when all of their stress is marked. And if they are forced to mark a stress when all of their stress is marked, they have to mark a hit point. So if the player characters are fighting this demon of hubris, every time they fail a roll close to that demon, they are marking stress. That's on top of the stress costs they are paying for abilities, on top of anything else that characters do or that are done to characters that makes them have to mark a stress. If I were going to build a boss encounter around this demon, what I would probably do is focus on the emotion demons' interactions and synergies with one another, right? So that would be the boss is the demons together rather than the demon of hubris as more of that focus point. Even though they are a leader adversary, I think they are less solo-y than maybe some other leaders could be, though Unparalleled Skill and Terrifying means that they can create some danger there. Notably, this demon does not have Relentless. They rely on working together with the other demons. So a boss adversary is probably going to have, right, Relentless or some other way of acting more often. Now, sometimes that reaction might be like a reaction. That reaction might be a reaction feature, right? Every time somebody hits you, or every time someone marks a stress within close of you, they have to mark an additional stress. Reactions are a great way of being able to still make moves as the GM, regardless of how the player characters roll and regardless of how much fear you have. Because one of the things that I think we probably don't want for a boss encounter is an adversary environment combination that is entirely reliant on the GM having a lot of fear to start the scene and a high stream of fear. I want to be able to have this adversary or this scene feel dangerous, feel scary, project threat pretty consistently in a almost self-reliant way. So I pulled up the Burning Heart of the Woods. I talked about it this weekend with somebody and was reminded how much I like this environment. It's probably one of my favorites from the core book. A thing about this one is that it is less generic and more specific. It is not just cursed woods. It is burning heart of the woods. Thick indigo ash fills the air around a towering, moss-covered tree that burns eternally with flames, a sickly shade of blue. We've gone beyond cursed woods to here is a particular type of cursed woods where the aesthetics and the description of this space have already been done, and you have specific imagery. So if I were going to build a boss encounter around the Burning Heart of the Woods, the thing I would probably do for it is an indigo flame elemental, right? And a fire elemental that has been corrupted by whatever this force of otherworldly flame is, right? Is it the flame that burns down the world? Is it the flame that was the first spark of creation of the universe, returned to burn down what is so that something new can be created? I'd be trying to build on the thematic elements here. The other thing I might do is like an ash elemental, right? Because we have charcoal constructs and we have choking ash as a feature. So if you want to build a boss encounter around a particular place, you might start with your environment stat block and then think about, based on what I've decided about the physical, emotional, spiritual, supernatural space of this encounter, who is a great individual to place within that who can manifest and apply some of the things that are interesting and specific about the place that you've created. So I considered just building the indigo flame elemental as the thing that we do as an example here. I might come back to that, but I think maybe the best way to do this in terms of building examples is to do both the adversary and the environment together as the thing that we're building and talk about how all of that fits together as we go. Interesting things about the Burning Heart before we move on, right? The Chaos Magic Locus, when a PC makes a spellcast roll, they must roll 2 fear dice and take the higher result. It makes player characters' spellcasts rolls more likely to succeed and more likely to be rolls with fear. So that is a fear generation engine. It's a little bit softer of one, but is a passive, so it is just always operating. This is an exploration environment, so there is some learning about things. But it might be that you let the player characters engage with the Burning Heart of the Woods for a while, and then either you set a countdown for when the elemental arrives, or only by figuring out what's going on can they make the elemental show up, and only by then doing something to the elemental can they purify the Burning Heart of the Woods. What that would give me is a non-combat objective for the player characters to engage with to make that scene have more dimension and more dynamics, right? The elemental is trying to kill you, and you are trying to purify or banish the elemental. And maybe one of the things that they learn is that this fire elemental cannot be just defeated, right? You cannot just put this fire out because it is a primordial fire of rage or something like that, whatever your theme is. And so you need that ritual of nature magic, right? With a progress countdown 8. It's left very open to interpretation of how you might progress or conduct that ritual. And that is cool because it gives player characters a bunch of different options. It could mean that your warrior or brawler or guardian character could still contribute to that ritual, even though they don't do magic. Because we want everybody to be able to be involved. This Grasping Vines action, right? This is a way to make characters restrained and vulnerable, as well as dealing damage without needing to spend fear. They also lose some hope here. So if you're making characters lose hope and you're increasing the likelihood of generating results with fear, you're putting metacurrency pressure on the characters. Less hope, more fear. Right? This one is just, here's a cool other thing that the environment can do, and it has some strong vibes. And then Choking Ash, sorry, let me scroll this up, is a looping countdown that's about kind of choking, right? You're going to take direct damage, but you can prepare for it. Okay, so the next thing we should do is make a new thing. I still want to do tier 2 because I've done a lot of tier 3 because I've done a lot of tier 2 homebrew design, and I want to make stuff across a range of tiers. So a thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to me, and I'm going to do something I forgot to do earlier, which is I'm going to open my environments homebrew document that I have. I was just talking about this yesterday. If you're the person I was talking to, you know what's up. So I have Ancient City, Masquerade Ball, Tornado, Time Loop. Okay, let's go to Ancient City. So I'm going to grab my Ancient City environment, and we're going to build off of it. So what that means is I may take this Ancient City environment and then instead of using it as is or replacing it completely, I'm going to do something that basically lets me rewrite or replace the... No, that didn't do what I wanted it to do at all. I'm going to reinterpret the Ancient City toward being a boss encounter. Or I will make a new environment that's a sub-environment within the Ancient City. So we're going to go back over here. Ancient City, a largely intact abandoned city from a past civilization, hidden from casual discovery and containing long buried secrets. So a thing I have here is like, oh, you might run into the emotion demons because they were like trapped in something here. But the key thing that I want is a city from a past civilization hidden from discovery. And what I think we're going to do is we're going to have like an ancient ruler whose soul has been imbued into like a big construct, right? And so they ruled this city, but then something happened. This ruler spirit was placed into this big construct, and they are the will that animates this city, right? So they control the whole city. The whole city is sort of like their body, but we're mostly going to have some chunk that the characters have to interact with. Or maybe the fact that the whole city is the adversary's body suggests or gestures toward what the player characters have to do to kind of disable or overcome this adversary, right? What if they have to run around the whole city and do stuff while the ruler is screwing with them in these different forms, right? That feels like we're building towards something. So, right, this is going to be, right, or the, let's say that this enemy was known as the Triarch. I'm sure there's some other Triarch from something. It may even be from Critical Role, right? Triarch would just mean that they are like a 3-oriented ruler, right? Unit by tri. It's a cool name. So let's say we're going to leave this. I'm going to get rid of impulses for a little while now. I'm going to ignore potential adversaries because we have the particular thing, right? So we have the Triarch preserved, and that is going to be our adversary, right? You are 15, and so this is going to be 15. So this is going to be a tier 3. Let's call this enemy... this is a solo because the whole city is them, and so it's like, right, it's all one thing together. Honor of Kingsburn, their living city. That is almost certainly one of the things that I was subconsciously drawing on Junkrabbit, having watched the stuff from Secret Level, and I thought that episode was pretty cool. So we're jumping up here. We're just going to grab some stuff from tier 3. I tend to start stat blocks by grabbing an existing one from the SRD and then modifying it. I think we probably want the difficulty of the environment and the difficulty of the boss adversary to be the same, because if the city is an extension of their body, it makes sense fictionally to me for the difficulty to be the same. It also makes it just easier on the GM. So let's say this is going to be difficulty 18, like the boss is. I'm going to leave these thresholds for now. They probably are going to end up going up, but I'm going to raise the HP here to 12, especially because I think I want to try to build toward that idea that you need to engage with the environment to have the best chance of defeating this enemy. It might be that one of the features we end up with says if the Triarch Preserved marks their last HP, you do something like set a countdown, and when that countdown triggers, they just assemble a new body from the living city and are going to come at you again. A thing that we really do need to figure out is, what is the Triarch's motivation? What do they want from this scene, right? So they want suborn outsiders to spread their influence to the modern world, right? So this is a quote-unquote dead ruler or overlord of a past civilization. And if their body is kind of stuck in this city, then they need some way to gain power or escape that, right? So that might be creating a kind of basically a magic copy of themselves in some artifact that somebody takes. It might be using the power or gaining the power to be able to magically expand the city in some way, right? Expand their body domain beyond the right. So these are motivations, and then we can come back to tactics. I'm just gonna leave this here, and then this is gonna be, no, this is add description. Right, that's not the key thing here. Let's say that the Triarch Preserved is going to have like robot-y kind of body, and one of their main attacks is just going to be like a magic beam attack, right? And so that's going to be a range of far, 3d10, but magic. And then there's going to be Monarch, or I don't know, Overlord, +2, Mage, +3, right. I want some experience that is how they can use the mastery they have over their city body, right? So civil engineering as an experience, as like that can be our stand-in, or at least our temp experience that represents that, right? Overlord is for social interaction, kind of being domineering, intimidation, things like that. Mage represents overall, like, or different magical abilities that they have. And so we've got a few experiences there. Attack of +4 is really good. I'll come back to this stuff. The stress rank I might increase. But then let's go on to features. So I think this boss is going to be Relentless. Nope. Relentless 2 as a baseline. The thing about this is, if the boss is both the body and the environment, environments, unless I'm misremembering what is written in core, you can shift the environment more than one time in a GM turn. Right? So you could use several moves that represent the city level action, but not the kind of boss body type. And so this is something we may come back to, right? Are they considered to be the same for relentless? Do we make a rule down here with the environment that says, here's the limitation on how much this adversary can act? Let's bring this down to 13 here. So I'm going to go and grab the relentless. This is relentless. It means they can go twice. Let's keep moving forward. So they have a big machine body. That means that they are going to be okay. Part of boss encounters is that they are big and they are not simple to deal with. The Triarch is immune to physical damage. There's always more city. You cannot just smash because the Triarch has more city to turn into their body and come at you. They are not immune to magic damage. The thing I do want to do if I'm going to keep this is I want to make sure to remember that I need to give characters who are focused on physical damage things to do in the scene. We know that we already want to have some kind of environment engagement option for player characters. So I think we're all right on this so far. If I go all the way to this point where they're immune to physical and resistant to magic, that's really telling the player characters, hey, this isn't about dealing damage. For now, I'm going to leave that off because I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think the rebirth environment, the rebirth thing should probably, for now, I'm going to put it on the adversary stat block. So that is going to be, oh yeah, this can all be the same thing, right? This is a passive. It's about the fact that they are as enduring as the seas. When we could split hairs here and say that this should be a separate reaction feature, and I may change my mind and make it be one later on. That's fine. Marks their last HP, activate a countdown for when triggered. The Triarch reappears within a far distance of the PCs with half their HP cleared. Right? They just assemble a new body to come and screw with the player characters. There, you have a little bit of time to go and do something before they come back. Right? It's a kind of a respawn timer. A thing I want to figure out earlier, sooner rather than later, is a reaction feature that will keep the Triarch able to put pressure on player characters. So they're a living city. You're trying to attack them. You're using magic damage. Right? The Triarch has a far range attack, so they can attack people who are in a lot of different places. Features that go on the adversary, I'm trying to focus on as being kind of that particular thing. The idea I came to was that the Archmage would just kind of remove the floor from underneath you and trap people. I think I may have that be instead. There's just too much here. I'm going to remove all this kind of stuff. Removing that. magical reconfiguration. Here is a thing I want to keep. The cities in the buildings of the city shift, reconfiguring into another formation according to an unseen clock or intelligence that operates the city like a clockwork device, right? This I would rewrite to be, it's about the Triarch, right? But I'm going to turn this into pick a PC who becomes isolated from the party and restrained as the city grows into a cage. Right, and so there's reconfiguration, and it just locks somebody in a cage. Right, PC can escape with a strength or agility roll. Right, so you could do spell cast and kind of undo the magic that is animating the city, or you can just bust out with strength. Rules as written, I think you can just say, hey, this character gains this status, and if you don't say anything else, what the GM should assume, and this is just my opinion, but it's my interpretation of rules as written, that a player character will need to make a relevant roll, but on a success, they can remove that status. Listing out what traits you can use, for me, is meant to be more, hey, I'm just making sure you understand kind of what's going on, rather than these are the only options, right? You can bust your way out with strength, or you can use magic to kind of unconfigure this around you, right? So right, we may even have like an idea, a thing where it's like, oh, there's reconfiguration features and you can only use one reconfiguration feature per GM turn, so that the GM isn't like going too hog wild. Maybe we'll end up with that, maybe not. There's a point at which adding additional restriction or additional features becomes just another thing to have to remember and doesn't help you as much as the limitation it involves might help a GM in telling a particular type of story. So TBD on that, right? One of the things that I want to give with these design streams is a pretty much basically a live, like a live blog, a live experience of how I think through the different way that things can apply, right? So flashes of the past is another thing that's here in the ancient city. On any failure with hope, give the PC a brief flash of memory from the moments leading up to the fate that left the city abandoned and forgotten. The first time this is used, activate a countdown when triggered, right? This I might rewrite to be about the Triarch. Up to the Triarch's fall. This is also a little bit me riffing on the theorize process for Carved from Brindlewood mysteries, right? You engage with stuff. So this should be a progress countdown. Countdown 3, 4. I'm going to have this be 2 plus X, so that even on a 3, even with a 3-person party, it's still a countdown 5, because on a progress countdown, a success with hope will remove 2 will advance the countdown by 2. And if it were just X, then 1 critical could complete the countdown for a party of 3. This here is also some scaling, because if it's a party of 6, this becomes a progress countdown 8. Right, and then a group knowledge roll. So we have something that requires knowledge. We have a thing up here that requires strength, maybe. And so the idea here is that the people of this place tried to get rid of the Triarch, but what they did instead, what they ended up doing was kind of imbuing the whole city with the Triarch's spirit. And then the idea is, on a failure with hope, they're going to get these flashes. So as they're succeeding on stuff, they're keeping the Triarch at bay. But when they fail, a failure with hope will give them the chance to get this flash. As I'm rereading it, I'm wondering, do I change this from a progress countdown to instead being every time you get a flash of the past, you advance the countdown, right? So you keep using this. Right, and then if this countdown is already active, advance it. So here's how that ends up working in this new interpretation. The first failure with hope in the scene, you get a flash of memory. The first time it's used in the scene, you activate this countdown. The idea here is that this countdown does not advance except when you use flashes of the past. As you get more flashes, you put more of the picture together, and then when it's triggered, the PCs can make that group action roll to theorize a method. On a failure, reset the countdown to 3, and the PCs may theorize again when the countdown triggers. Right? You make a theory, it's wrong, what happens? The countdown resets to 3, you get more flashes, you try again. What that will let you do is you avoid the situation where, okay, we're going to theorize. We do a group action and we roll. And it fails. And then the GM makes a move, and then you just theorize again. That means that the scene has really narrowed in a way that I don't know is necessarily going to be what I'm looking for. Having the countdown reset to 3 means that the player characters are going to have to survive or maneuver around for a little while, and then they'll get to do it again. The question for that becomes, what are the player characters doing when they have theorized and failed? Right? They're going to need to be doing things that are holding the Triarch at bay, or they're trying to run away, or they're trying to do things that are increasing their defenses. So that's something I want to keep in mind, that I need some things for the player characters to be doing when they are in this loop. Or I need to change my mind and let the player characters just make another roll to theorize if they fail. Understanding that that could be less dynamic, and I'll need to keep some things in mind for that. Right, this would be if I were going to have there be a big exploration sequence and then the Triarch shows up. I think instead I would use the ancient city environment, and then when the Triarch activates, I switch to the Triarch's domain, or I add the Triarch's domain. So I'm going to remove this, which means that I need a passive feature. right? The Triarch can sense, treat any part of the city as what I want to convey is, right, that they are everything. Hear, smell, or see through or from any part of the city. A PC wishing to become hidden must complete a progress countdown. Right? It takes a lot of work to hide from the Triarch. The Triarch is everywhere, but they're not everywhere all at once. Though they cannot sense, they cannot use every part of the city at the same time. Right? So they can move their consciousness and their sensory apparatus around a bunch, but they can't be everywhere all at once. They are not everything everywhere all at once. And so PCs could theoretically hide if they are smart enough, because the Triarch doesn't necessarily know where to put their focus. The idea here being that that is something the player characters could do in order to get themselves the breathing room to theorize. And it gives the space a very particular quality. This idea that it's really hard to hide from the Triarch because they animate the whole city, right? This is another passive that's just conveying the physical realities of the situation, right? The Triarch's soul has been bound to the city. They can control its shape and actions, but cannot escape from the physical confines of the city itself. This is why the Triarch has not been a problem while the city has been lost. They can't get anywhere. Okay, so we have their thing for dealing with stealth. So I'm just going to move this around a little bit so it's a little bit more centered. They can do this cool reconfiguration thing to make a detention cube. I think we're going to have another reconfiguration. These should be parenthetical. That's what we're going to do. I'm just thinking about formatting here. Reconfiguration. So the next thing I had in mind was a labyrinth, which kind of forces the characters to either split up, or it just makes it hard for them to get from place A to place B. That's the same move in the GM turns, right? It is separate the PCs. And so that could be fine, and it makes more of this encounter about the characters getting separated from each other. Or I think about something else reconfiguration can do. So this is, maybe this is collapse. Junkrabbit asks, curious how many rolls you are expecting in an encounter for flashes of the past, only triggering once every three or 1/5 of the rolls, right? Only on a failure with hope. So here are some things that I can do to make that work more easily. I can make rolls harder or give disadvantage to player characters, right? Add a difficulty or give the player characters disadvantage. I could also add a passive feature that lets the player characters actively engage, basically actively create flashes of the past. I could also reduce this countdown, right? If I play test it and find, oh, they're getting flashes really slowly, right? A party of 8 player characters, doesn't that end up being too long? So it's a fair point to raise. I have found that in previous times when I've set countdowns to be timers in the game in a big encounter, I end up setting them too low. This may be overcorrection, but that's where I'm thinking for right now. And if a player character, if I was running this and someone was like, I want to try and reconnect with one of the spirits to get another flash of the past and advance this countdown, I would absolutely let somebody try to make a roll for that, right? That's probably an instinct roll. Or it's a roll to find a spirit and then a presence roll to convince them to grant a memory. Does that need to be written in the environment? Maybe, maybe not. I might come back to it. I'm going to have this require spending a fear. Yeah, Splenda. Spend 2 fear. So some of these bigger reconfiguration things are going to cost fear because they have a bigger impact on the scene. To create a pick a point within the city, all characters within close of that point must make an agility reaction roll or so this is the Triarch just collapses a building on you, right? They create a rubble, an avalanche of rubble. This is an agility reaction roll, so we're creating things that prompt or require different traits. We have knowledge, we have strength, we have agility. Instinct came up earlier in the idea of trying to connect with a flashback, right? One of the flashes of the past. So we're building the encounter such that there's different ways for different PCs with different high traits to be able to excel. So that's some stuff with the environment. I'm going to go back to the boss here. A thing I might add is right. I'm adding a limitation here. The GM can only use one reconfiguration action during a GM turn, right? You can do the cube or a collapse, but not both of them. There's already sort of a limiter on it because of the fear cost. And so I might, with playtesting, end up lowering some of the fear cost because I already have this built-in limitation. or I remove the limitation, but I like the idea of the GM picks one of a few reconfiguration options, and on a GM turn, they might think about, okay, I'm going to do this with the adversary part of the Triarch, and I'm going to do this with the reconfiguration. I might end up with a third reconfiguration action, but we already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 features. I don't know exactly what the cognitive load limit for an average GM would be in terms of, if I have these two stat blocks side by side, what's the number of features I shouldn't go above? I think we could sort of extrapolate from some of what is in core what the implicit assumption is, even if it was not consciously expressed. But for now, let's just keep going forward. So, okay, I wanted something that's very mean. This is very mean. It may end up being too mean. But the key here, this is my thinking. When a PC rolls a success with hope, mark a stress to change the result into a failure with hope. What does that do? A failure with hope activates flashes of the past. And so the GM is going to want occasionally to say, oh wow, if they get that success with hope on this, they're going to make a lot of progress. They're going to make good progress in the scene. But if the Triarch manipulates fate and turns it into a failure with hope, that then triggers flashes of the past and means that we are going to get flashes of the past more often. The other thing I might do, if this turns out to be too powerful, I might say mark a stress to force the player to re-roll. And so then there's another chance for it to instead be a failure with hope. Another thing I could do is put something into this scene or this encounter that lowers the fear die, so it makes results with hope more likely, or increase the hope die, which makes results with hope more likely, even if they are failures or successes. The former, reducing the fear die, is more likely to generate failures with hope because the overall die range is decreasing. If I increase the hope die's range, then they're more likely to succeed in general and more likely to get a result with hope. So those are some of those other options that I have for thinking about, for making sure that the different interconnecting parts of this boss encounter are reinforcing and supporting one another, right? Hopefully y'all are following. If not, if you have questions and you're live, please ask them. If you are watching on the VOD, please ask there. And we will all work through this together. So, right, this Triarch is a powerful mage, right? We know that they have a mage experience up here, and we know that part of their thing is that they're immune to physical damage, and So people are going to be using magic damage against them. Okay, well, you use damage against me. When the Triarch takes at least major magic damage, force the attacker to mark a stress. Because the Triarch is immune to physical damage, I could just say when the Triarch takes at least major damage, but I could see a world where something happens and a player character makes the Triarch vulnerable to physical damage again, or where the GM decides that this countdown just makes the Triarch vulnerable, like makes them susceptible to physical damage again, or deactivates the respawn element. So being just a tiny bit more specific here, I like, because it makes some other things tidier. And it's only at the cost of one additional word in the stat block, so I don't mind it. So we have a pressure engine when the Triarch takes damage. We have a way for the Triarch to generate more failures with hope. That is also a way to make player characters' successes into failures. Because that is really mean, it requires a stress expenditure, and right now the Triarch only has 5 stress. Tier 3 player characters are pretty likely to have ways of dealing stress to an adversary. The other thing I can do here is I could put a limiter on Manipulate Fate, right? Up to 3 times in a scene, mark a stress to change the result into a failure with hope. That will still generate flashes of the past, but it means that if the group is not dealing stress to the Triarch is not going to cause 5 failures in a scene. I could even see reducing this down to 2, because there's going to be some organic failures with hope in a scene, and then there's some that are manipulated. This is definitely something that would be worth playtesting to see where that balance is. So we have a passive, a reaction, and a second reaction. I want an action for the Triarch that is more it's more direct aggressive, right? We have the reconfiguration actions. So this is going to be, I want this to be some kind of AoE or multi-target kind of a thing. Right. Against. So spend a fear to make an etheric beam attack against every target within far, right? The Triarch's beam arms just go, right? They shoot from everywhere. And so everybody's getting attacked in the barrage. Again, that is a way for the Triarch to apply pressure to the entire party at once. My question here is, do I want to give the Triarch momentum, where using barrage has a pretty good chance of generating a fear? Is that too much of a direct fear feedback loop, right? Where you spend a fear, well, you have to spend a fear for the move, and then you have to spend a fear for the specific feature. So that's 2 fear to do the second barrage. That means that this is less of a infinite feedback loop in terms of maxing out the Triarch's Relentless every time that the GM gets the spotlight. So I feel like that's a pretty good limiter. So I can go ahead and give momentum. This may not actually be the official language for momentum, but that's basically what it means. So what that can be is that the Triarch uses a barrage. So when they get a move, they spend a fear, they make an attack against everybody. You can only gain 1 fear on momentum because this is a single attack applied to everybody. It counts as 1 attack even though it's different beams because of the fiction first element of Daggerheart. The barrage is 1 attack even though it's maybe 7 lasers. And so you only gain the 1 fear. And then if you wanted to barrage again, you would have to spend a fear for an extra move and then spend a fear for the barrage move. That's pretty costly for the fact that you get to attack everybody. And this barrage attack, 3d10 magic, is not a ton of damage. This could even increase, right? We have the collapse thing that generates 3d20 damage. So the pressure here is not overwhelming damage. The pressure is that the Triarch is everywhere. The Triarch controls the city. The Triarch comes back when you mark all of their HP. And then you need to engage with things about the city itself to beat the boss. So there's things you need to learn about in the scene, right? You learn that the Triarch is immune to physical damage. You learn that the Triarch can respawn. You learn things about what the city was. And if I were GMing this, I would signal when I set that countdown at something like, you want this countdown to trigger. Or when the second flash of the past says, and on that, I'm advancing this countdown as your knowledge of the city and the Triarch increases. That should signal to a group of players, oh, this is something we want to keep pressing on. And then that may even be when they ask, hey, can I try to generate one of these flashes of the past? Another thing I could do is I could add a feature on the environment that says when you roll a success with hope, you can turn it into a failure with hope, or a more costly thing that says when you roll a failure with fear, you can do something to turn it into a failure with hope. That is nicer because failure with fear is the worst result. You sacrifice a success with hope to become a failure with hope. That still generates a GM turn, but not having to fail with fear is also pretty nice, especially because there's things here that cost fear. So I bet we could give the Triarch 1 more action. And then if I were going to do more here, I would revisit these, like the damage thresholds and things. So let's see if we can think up 1 more action for the Triarch that is the Triarch body is doing stuff. Oh yeah, it's a grab, right? Now here, oh, sorry, I'm scrolled too far up. If this is a reconfiguration, should it instead go on the environment stat block? Because then the actual reconfiguration limit comes into play. This passive would still apply. So I think I'm okay with it. So this is reconfiguration grab. Target a PC within close who must make a... I mean, I'd love it to be finesse, but it maybe makes sense. Right? If it were, it could be instinct, presence. Right? I'm just trying to hit all of the traits here. Right, so the idea here is that the Triarch turns part of the city into a hand that is going to try and grab the player character. Right? So on a failure, they become restrained and suffer 3d 12 plus 3 physical damage. Right? So they're grabbed and smooshed. Here, I may decide that I want to write something in specific about what it takes to get out of the reconfiguration. And there's something here about physical damage, because normally the Triarch is immune, but if you destroy the hand, somebody should be able to get freed. So I'm going to have a little bit of drink of water and think about this. So what that might make me do is say the Triarch is resistant to physical damage, and then test it and make sure that that doesn't mean that they end up too weak. PC can be freed with an action roll or by dealing at least major damage to the hand. So you can attack the grabbing hand directly and destroy it, and then somebody is released. If you additionally spend a fear, they... So I changed this because I do want something that makes a player character vulnerable, because that heightens the danger, right? Because any action against them is made with advantage. So the reconfiguration tries to grab you, make an agility roll or finesse reaction, agility or finesse reaction roll to try to avoid it. On a failure, you become restrained and vulnerable. If you additionally spend a fear, they suffer 3d12 plus 3 physical damage. The Triarch could still do an etheric beam attack against somebody who is being grabbed and held. Because this adversary already has several other features, I don't know that I necessarily want to add a crush action. But that would be one of the other things that I do. But that would not be a reconfiguration action. Right? It would just be if a character is restrained and vulnerable within the Triarch's hand, probably do a bunch of damage, or right, force the target to make some kind of reaction roll or take a bunch of damage. And maybe that damage is direct damage. So if we look at this overall, right, I think I could probably take a break and then work another hour on this, but I have other things that I need to get to do, and hopefully this has been illustrative. I will probably keep working on this encounter. It may end up in one of the books that I publish. It will certainly show up on Patreon before it goes to one of those books, because this is not something that's going to go to Drakkenheim, right? Stuff that I make for myself can go on the Patreon. Stuff I'm making for Drakkenheim, probably not. So the Triarch can make 2 GM move, can act twice on a GM turn on their own, but also the environment can act, right? And you can use the detention cube or a collapse action. They have this flashes of the past reaction that gives the player characters information that they can build toward figuring out how to defeat the Triarch. And there's some special rules about how they exist in space and limitation on reconfiguration. We have the momentum where they can generate fear to kind of keep the fear economy going a little bit. This is not the strongest fear economy of a way that an adversary acts, because some of these other things are not about attacks, right? The collapse is not an attack. The barrage beams are an attack, and then it has its basic attack. If I made the grab feature, I'd probably turn that into an attack so that it could generate momentum, right? But it would be an attack with advantage because the target would need to be vulnerable. We have the rules on what happens if they mark all their HP, right? They get this countdown and then they come back, forcing the player characters toward figuring out what this bigger solution is, or toward like a social solution, right? That's certainly a possibility. If I wanted to add some more complexity here, I could add some features that are more social in how the Triarch interacts with player characters. But if this were going to go into a book or a module, I would have a section that was, here's more about who the Triarch is and their motivations and their agendas and likes and dislikes, so that the GM would be more prepared for a social type of interaction. This is more as a boss fight encounter. So last thing here, let's go take a look at some tier 3 adversaries, because I think the thresholds here on that demon are low compared to other things. 1935 for a Hydra solo, so not too low there. 2240 for an Oak Treant Bruiser. 2140 for a Vault Guardian Bruiser. Because the Triarch is resistant to physical damage, I don't need the thresholds to be quite as high. They're going to be more susceptible to magic damage. I'm fine with that. Less susceptible to physical damage. And because we have this respawn mechanic, I'm actually going to lower the Triarch's hit points so that that regen thing activates more quickly. I might even bring it down to 9. 3 severe hits will activate that respawn countdown. And the player characters will still need to assemble information. So the next thing I might do if I were going to keep working on this is figure out, can I consolidate one of these passives and add a passive that's about intentionally gaining memories that will reduce the flashes of the past countdown. So what I could do is I might move limited attention up to the adversary stat block, right? Because that's about personhood more, right? Or I can make that argument. And then I might add a passive down here, so it's only 3 passives, in 3 and 2 instead of 4 and 1. But it's also a little tricky because this is one adversary that has both an adversary stat block and an environment, right? They are both, which is fun and weird. If I wanted to consolidate, right, it would be one adversary that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 features, which is just a lot. And when the player characters are trying to get away from the Triarch, we mostly focus on the environment section. And when they are more directly engaging with the Triarch, we're mostly focusing on the adversary section. So there's a little bit of the ability to have one of the stat blocks come to the foreground and one go to the background. Not entirely, because there are some things we need to remember the whole time, but as I'm doing my passes, I'm thinking about how to streamline cognitive load for the GM in managing this cool big boss fight. So thank you to Junkrabbit for hanging out and chatting. Thanks to Not a Hag for contributing to the Cult Totem. I raise my glass to you and mute it. Not this week and maybe not next week, but I'd love to do a sharing spotlight in December. That crowdfunding stream that I did last week was sort of also a sharing spotlight, but it's a fun series. I want to keep doing it because because last week's stream was something different. I feel like this stream, we have not as many people who are watching live, so I want to try to build that back up as I can. And some people are probably not watching because they're like on the road for holidays and things, so that's also totally fine. Thanks to the folks who are watching this on the VOD later on, whenever and wherever you are. Thanks to everybody who has been supporting the Dungeons of Drakenheim Daggerheart Kickstarter, which I'm going to link again as a reminder. We are just over 48 hours remaining, right? So there's only a little bit more than 2 days remaining in this campaign. We are currently at $382,018, which is a lot of money. There was just another pledge, so if that was you watching live, thank you. The next stretch goal at 400,000 is a random encounter chart, which would be really fun to make. And then the $500,000 goal is a community poll feature, right? A feature to be added to the project that the community of backers will vote on. And that would be really fun. So we've got that. And then thank you to folks who are supporting me directly on Patreon. Patreon.com/Michael R. Underwood. I've been looking at some of how Patreon does stuff and realized that Patreon has been bugging me for a long time to switch to a method of subscription where people are they're charged on the date that they sign up for Patreon instead of everybody only being charged on the first of the month. And I will probably go ahead and make that change. If you are already subscribed, it will not change. This will not change for you, I don't think. You won't get charged twice in a month is the thing that I'll say. If somehow you do get charged twice in a month, contact me and I will make it right. Whether that is working with Patreon or working with you directly. The thing that I want here is to just be a little bit more consistent. And as I'm moving toward offering products through like, oh, okay, you're a patron at $10 and you get this. There's a way to do it where you could get it for free because you don't get charged right away. And there's only so flexible I feel like being when people are getting full retail products. So that's just a little bit of nitty gritty. For most people, it will not matter because you're either already a patron or when you sign up, it'll work like it works for almost every other Patreon and it will not be weird or strange for you. So that's that. I am going to switch over to here to say thank you again to folks for hanging out, and I will see you after the holiday. Take care. Where is my end screen? This is on the stream.